We've all been told the story. It's a comforting one. We diligently sort our plastics, our paper, our glass. We wash out the yogurt pots and peel off the labels. We place our blue bin on the curb with a sense of quiet satisfaction, believing we are doing our part for the planet. This simple act, repeated in millions of homes across the developed world, is meant to be our contribution to a cleaner, greener Earth. It's a narrative sold to us by governments, corporations, and environmental campaigns. A story that promises our consumption doesn't have to come with a guilty conscience because our waste will be reborn, endlessly transformed into new and useful things. But what if that story is a lie? What if the journey of that plastic bottle doesn't end at a state-of-the-art recycling facility down the road, but instead begins a dark voyage across the globe? The truth is, the recycling system we place our faith in is often a carefully constructed illusion. It's a global shell game designed to hide a dirty secret. For many wealthy nations, recycling has become a convenient euphemism for exporting their waste problems to someone else's backyard. The blue bin on our street corner is not the end of the story. For many communities in the global south, it is the beginning of a nightmare. This system allows us, the consumers in rich countries, to continue our habits without facing the consequences. It's easier and, most importantly, cheaper. The sheer volume of plastic we produce, a staggering 460 million metric tons globally in 2023 alone, is simply too much for our own systems to handle. So we outsource the problem. We load our compressed bales of low-grade, often contaminated plastic onto massive container ships and send them thousands of miles away. We get to keep our streets clean and our recycling rates looking impressive on paper, all while turning a blind eye to the environmental and human devastation this trade leaves in its wake. The myth of infinite recycling is convenient because it absolves everyone of responsibility. The manufacturers can keep churning out single-use plastics. The governments can avoid investing in expensive domestic recycling infrastructure. And we, the public, can keep buying, using, and disposing of it all, comforted by the belief that it's all being taken care of. But this carefully maintained facade is cracking. The destinations for our discarded plastic are overflowing, and the people living there are no longer willing to suffer in silence. The comfortable story we've been telling ourselves is finally being exposed as a global scam. The numbers behind the plastic crisis are almost too large to comprehend. Since the 1950s, global plastic production has increased 200 times over. It's projected to triple again by 2060, reaching over 1 billion tons every single year. Yet of all the plastic ever created, a shocking 9% has actually been recycled. The rest sits in landfills, pollutes our oceans, or is incinerated, releasing toxic fumes into the atmosphere. We are quite literally drowning in a material that was designed to last forever. Our planet has become a dumping ground for a substance we cannot seem to control, and our recycling systems are failing spectacularly. This is where the global shell game begins. Faced with this overwhelming tide of waste, wealthy countries have found a clever, if deeply unethical, solution. They export it. While only about 2% of the world's plastic waste is officially traded internationally, this small fraction represents millions of tons of material, and the flow is overwhelmingly one way from the rich world to the poor. It's a transaction that benefits the exporter, who gets to offload a costly problem for a fraction of the price of dealing with it responsibly at home. They get to claim it's been recycled the moment it leaves their port. A convenient accounting trick that masks the reality of the situation. The reality is that much of this exported plastic is not high-quality, easily recyclable material. It's often mixed, contaminated, and worthless plastic that no domestic facility would ever accept. It's the flimsy packaging, the dirty food containers, and the composite materials that are technically impossible to recycle. Developing nations are essentially paid to take our rubbish. They are promised a stream of valuable materials they can process and sell, but what they often receive is a mountain of unmanageable trash. This isn't a fair trade. It's the rich world paying the poor world to inherit its pollution, a modern form of waste colonialism. This trade has become a booming business, valued at over $1.1 trillion in 2023. It's a system built on deception. Labels on bales of plastic might claim the contents are clean and sorted, But when they are opened in a port in Southeast Asia or West Africa, the reality is often a toxic mess. Local communities are then left with the impossible task of sorting through this foreign waste. They lack the technology, the resources, and the regulatory oversight to manage it safely. The plastic deluge continues, and the shell game ensures that those with the least power are the ones left to clean up the mess. The map of the global plastic waste trade tells a clear and disturbing story. The primary exporters are the world's most advanced economies. As of 2023, the top 5 nations shipping their plastic problem abroad were Germany, Japan, the Netherlands, the United Kingdom, and the United States. These are countries that pride themselves on their environmental credentials, yet they are the biggest players in this toxic trade. Between 2022 and 2023, exports from these wealthy OECD nations to non-OECD countries saw a significant jump of around 15%. The European Union, a supposed leader in green policy, saw its exports to vulnerable nations skyrocket by 74% between 2021 and August 2024. For a long time, China was the world's primary destination for recyclable materials. It was the endpoint for almost half of the planet's plastic waste. But in 2018, the country implemented its national sword policy, banning the import of most foreign waste. This single act sent shockwaves through the global recycling industry and exposed its fundamental weakness. Suddenly, exporting nations were left with mountains of plastic they had no capacity to process. Instead of investing in domestic solutions, they simply found new destinations, countries with weaker laws and more desperate economies. The flow of waste was rerouted, not stopped. The new dumping grounds became the nations of Southeast Asia. Countries like Malaysia, Indonesia, Vietnam, and Thailand were inundated with shipments of Western waste. These nations quickly became the world's top importers, but they were completely unprepared for the sheer volume and poor quality of the material they received. Unscrupulous brokers and corrupt officials facilitated the trade, and illegal recycling plants sprang up overnight in rural villages. These operations had no environmental controls, no safety standards, and no proper way of disposing of the materials that couldn't be recycled, which was often most of it. The consequences were immediate and devastating. Up to 83% of the plastic waste imported into these Southeast Asian countries is estimated to be mismanaged. This means it isn't recycled at all. Instead, it's dumped in illegal landfills that leach toxins into the soil and groundwater. It's piled up along riverbanks where it chokes waterways and eventually flows out to sea. Or most dangerously, it's burned in the open air, releasing clouds of poisonous smoke that blanket entire communities. Our neatly sorted recycling from a London suburb or a Tokyo high-rise ends its life cycle as toxic ash in a village in Indonesia. The statistics are grim, but they don't capture the true human cost of this global trade. To understand that, you have to go to the places where our waste ends up. In Indonesia, entire villages have been transformed into toxic processing zones. Rivers that once provided fish and clean water are now clogged with a thick sludge of plastic from America, Germany, and the UK. Informal workers, including children, spend their days sorting through mountains of foreign rubbish, often without gloves or masks. They are searching for the few valuable scraps of plastic they can sell, while breathing in the fumes from the piles that are constantly burning around them. The story is tragically similar in West Africa. In Accra, Ghana, the Agbogbloshie scrapyard has become one of the most polluted places on Earth. It's known as a digital graveyard, a final resting place for the West's electronic waste. But alongside the broken computers and televisions comes a torrent of plastic. Here, young men and boys burn plastic-coated cables and casings to get at the valuable copper inside. The air is thick with a black, acrid smoke filled with lead, dioxins, and brominated flame retardants. These toxins settle in the soil and water, poisoning the entire food chain. A study found that chicken eggs from the area contained dioxin levels 220 times higher than the European safety limit. Perhaps one of the most horrifying examples of toxic colonialism is the Probo koala scandal. In 2006, a cargo ship chartered by the multinational company Trafigura illegally dumped hundreds of tons of toxic industrial waste around Abidjan, the largest city in Ivory Coast. The waste, a caustic sludge from cleaning gasoline, was dumped in open-air sites across the city, near homes and water sources. The fumes sickened tens of thousands of people, causing nausea, headaches, and severe respiratory problems. 17 people died. It was a stark and brutal lesson in what happens when profit is prioritized over human life and environmental safety. These are not isolated incidents. They are the predictable outcomes of a system that treats entire countries and their populations as disposable. The health impacts are severe and widespread. Communities living near these informal recycling sites report high rates of asthma, skin diseases, and cancer. The environmental damage is catastrophic, poisoning land and water for generations to come. This is the hidden price of our convenient recycling system, a price paid not by us, but by the world's most vulnerable people, who are forced to live and die among the remnants of our throwaway culture. Why does this predatory system exist? The answer, as it so often is, comes down to money and power. For wealthy nations, exporting waste is simply a matter of cold, hard economics. The cost of collecting, sorting, and genuinely recycling a ton of plastic waste at home is incredibly high. Building and operating modern recycling plants that can handle complex, low-grade plastics requires massive investment. Landfill space is expensive and politically unpopular. It is far, far cheaper to pay a broker a few $100s to load that same ton of waste onto a ship and make it someone else's problem. Profit, not principle, drives the decision-making process. This economic incentive is mirrored in the importing countries, but with a desperate twist. For developing nations with struggling economies and high unemployment, the waste trade can seem like an opportunity. Governments, sometimes weakened by corruption, may turn a blind eye to the environmental regulations they have on the books. Local entrepreneurs see a chance to make money by setting up rudimentary recycling operations. And for the poorest people, sorting through foreign garbage is one of the few ways to earn a living, however dangerous it may be. The system preys on economic vulnerability, creating a cycle where poverty and pollution feed each other. This practice is not new. It's a modern iteration of a long and shameful history known as toxic colonialism. For centuries, colonial powers extracted resources from the global south. Today, the dynamic has been inverted. The global north now sends its toxic refuse back. It's a pattern of environmental racism, where the pollution and health risks associated with overconsumption in wealthy, predominantly white countries are disproportionately borne by communities of color in poorer nations. The logic is the same. The lives and environments of people in the global south are treated as less valuable than the economic convenience of the north. The failure of regulation has been a key enabler of this trade. For years, international laws were weak and full of loopholes, allowing waste to be mislabeled as green or for recycling to bypass what few controls existed. Even when rules are tightened, enforcement is often lax. Shippers and brokers are skilled at finding ways around the law, knowing that customs inspections are infrequent and penalties are low. The entire system is built on a foundation of economic disparity, regulatory failure, and a colonial mindset that views certain parts of the world as sacrifice zones, suitable for dumping the unwanted byproducts of our prosperity. For decades, the global waste trade operated in the shadows with little oversight. But the growing public outrage and the clear evidence of harm are finally forcing a change. The tide is slowly beginning to turn, as international bodies and national governments are being pressured to act. One of the most significant steps was the 2021 amendment to the Basel Convention, an international treaty that governs the movement of hazardous waste. The amendment brought plastic waste under its control, requiring exporting countries to get prior informed consent from importing countries before shipping most types of plastic. It was meant to make the trade more transparent and stop the dumping of contaminated loads. However, the initial results have been mixed. After a brief dip, export volumes from major players like the EU and the US rebounded sharply by 2023, suggesting that traffickers have found loopholes or that enforcement remains weak. This has led to calls for much stronger measures. The European Union, one of the world's biggest exporters, has responded by announcing a plan to ban all plastic waste exports to non-OECD countries. This landmark ban is scheduled to take effect in mid-2026 and, if fully implemented, could be a genuine game changer, forcing EU member states to finally take responsibility for their own waste. The most significant development on the horizon is the Global Plastics Treaty. Negotiations are underway for a legally binding UN treaty to end plastic pollution, with the final round scheduled for this very month, August 2025, in Geneva. This treaty has the potential to address the entire life cycle of plastic, from production to disposal. Over 100 nations are pushing for ambitious binding rules, including caps on the production of new virgin plastic. This is a crucial demand, as experts agree that we cannot simply recycle our way out of this crisis. We have to produce less plastic in the first place. But the path to a strong treaty is fraught with difficulty. A powerful coalition of fossil fuel and petrochemical producing countries, including the United States, Saudi Arabia and China, is pushing back hard. They favor a weaker, voluntary approach focused on recycling and waste management, the very systems that have already failed so spectacularly. The presence of hundreds of industry lobbyists at the negotiations further complicates matters. The outcome of these talks will determine whether we get a treaty with real teeth or another piece of paper that allows the toxic status quo to continue under a greenwashed banner. The story of the global recycling scam is a stark reminder that our actions have global consequences. The simple act of tossing a plastic bottle into a blue bin is not the end of its journey. It is the start of a complex and often destructive chain that links our consumption to the health and well-being of communities thousands of miles away. The comforting myth that we can recycle our way out of the plastic crisis has been shattered, revealing a system that profits from deception and thrives on inequality. It is a system that must be dismantled, not just reformed. The time for convenient illusions is over. True accountability begins at the source. We must fundamentally shift our focus from downstream recycling to upstream solutions. This means holding corporations accountable for the products they create. We need binding policies like extended producer responsibility, which makes manufacturers financially and physically responsible for the entire life cycle of their products. It means banning the most harmful and unnecessary single-use plastics and designing products for durability and genuine recyclability. And most critically, it means capping the runaway production of virgin plastic, which is the root cause of the entire crisis. We have to turn off the plastic tap. Wealthy nations must end the practice of waste colonialism, full stop. The upcoming EU ban on plastic waste exports to non-OECD countries is a vital step in the right direction, and it must be implemented without loopholes or delays. Other major exporters, especially the United States, Japan, and the UK, must follow suit. These countries have the wealth and technological capacity to build robust domestic recycling infrastructure and create a genuine circular economy. They must stop using the Global South as a release valve for their own overconsumption, and finally take responsibility for the mess they have created within their own borders. Ultimately, this is a fight for environmental justice. The communities in Indonesia, Ghana, and across the developing world who are living on the front lines of this crisis are not just victims. They are powerful advocates for change. We must listen to their voices and stand in solidarity with them. The Global Plastics Treaty offers a once-in-a-generation opportunity to create a fair and effective international framework. We must demand that our leaders resist the pressure from the fossil fuel lobby and negotiate a treaty that prioritizes human health and the environment over corporate profits. Only through binding global action, radical transparency, and unwavering accountability can we finally end this toxic scam.